Thank you. Thank you. You can probably hear that my voice is not working the way it should be working. And the reason I'm sitting down is I've just had like the trifecta of bronchitis, laryngitis, and am I contagious? No, I'm not. But can I stand up for very long yet? No. So thank you for letting me sit and join you, because I was so excited to be asked to have this time with you to talk about this project. So I didn't want to give up the opportunity, but I'll probably stop and sip some water every now and then. John, thank you for the welcome and also for the acknowledgement of country. One of the other things I'd like to acknowledge is the experience of people who have disability and who have faced challenges in their housing. And there'll be some people in this room who have that experience. And this project is building on the learnings from that lived experience. So I'd like to acknowledge that as well. You've done a great job in introducing this project. And I'd just like to, I guess, emphasise that this project is statewide and it's homelessness prevention. And it's a partnership, and maybe an unusual partnership, because it brings together Shelter WA, which is a peak in this space around housing and homelessness, but it also brings together a peak disability advocacy body. So that's People with Disabilities WA. Now, apologies from them today, but would you believe today is their AGM? So our really important partner, but obviously, you know, they couldn't be in two places at the same time. But Shelter is so pleased to have that expertise of a peak disability advocacy body in this project. Now, the funding also is a little bit unusual for Shelter. It's an information linkages and capacity building grant. So this is that part of the disability funding stream that is mainly for people with disability who are not getting individualised funding. This is the funding to people with disability living in the community. So this project definitely has a capacity building approach. Does it? I'm just going to sip some water. Testing my voice again. So as John mentioned, the experience of people with disability in renting is often poorer in comparison to people without disability. And often it plays out at the pointy part of rental inspections. So the rental inspection takes place and the property may have been damaged because the person uses mobility aids. They might have an assistance animal. People with disability less likely to be on a decent income, might not be able to afford or physically be able to undertake some of the maintenance of the property. People experiencing psychosocial disability might have challenges in letting people come into the property to do maintenance. There might be hoarding. All of these things play out in the most important space. It's where you live. So you have somebody coming in judging the way you are maintaining that property. And so that kind of interaction between the person with disability and whoever has this power over them in terms of judging the condition of the property, that becomes a really problematic space. And what we're hoping is this project can explicitly address that pointy part of the interaction. So what some people have found interesting about this project is they thought our focus would be more on specialist disability housing, and yet the majority of people who are renting who have disability are renting in the private rental sector, like most people. So in WA, and these figures are a little bit wobbly, I still have to get right into them. But looking at the survey of disability, ageing and carers, you're probably looking at 90 to 95,000 people with some kind of disability who are renting privately. So then if we look at the government housing, so public housing and community housing, so social housing, you may be around 5,500 people who identify as having disability are renting in that sector. So then we've got specialist disability accommodation, maybe 2,500 people. And I'm going to have to cough again, sorry. There's an unknown number of people with disability who live in lodging houses, boarding houses, who probably have quite few legal protections around their accommodation. And then there are people who are called residents of licensed psychiatric hostels. So maybe about 700 people. So this is quite a diverse population of people, and this project is looking at what are the ways we can most usefully interact with these quite different groups of people with quite different legal protections. So the vast majority of people who are renting, who have disability, would come under the Residential Tenancies Act. So that will cover people in government and social housing and the private sector. This project is going to look more at what specialist issues might come up for people in boarding and lodging houses who are not covered currently by the Residential Tenancies Act, and also for people who have some kind of licence to occupy their specialist disability accommodation. So we're going to look more at what we need to understand there to support those arrangements. But by and far, the vast majority of people are in the private sector, there with a significant number in social housing. So that's kind of the focus is maybe not as on the built environment as people often focus on when we're talking about disability and housing. This is about the experience of renting. This is about the experience of maintaining your tenancy when you're renting, knowing that there are those additional challenges when you're experiencing different types of disability. So we got the funding, which is fantastic, and the project's just getting started now. So the deliverables. So people with disability have said that they would like to feel more confident as tenants. They would like to be able to self-advocate. They would like to understand their rights and their responsibilities as tenants. So one of the deliverables from this project is that individual capacity building approach. It's what resources do people with disability who are renting, what do they want so they feel more confident as a tenant? So the deliverables are resources that are developed by people with lived experience and workshops that people can attend and participate in. So that's one of our deliverables, that's the individual capacity building. And that's a really important part, and excited to see what the lived experience co-design group comes up with in terms of identifying what they need and in what format it should be. The other deliverable is the organisational capacity building. So there are a bunch of services available to support people to hang on to their rental. There's a bunch. There's advocacy, there's financial counselling, there's financial support if you get into arrears. There are a whole lot of services funded under the National Housing Homelessness Agreement to deliver support to tenants who are struggling. But what people with disabilities say is, those services aren't always available to me. I might need to access that service in a different way. My disability might not be visible. My disability might not be understood. I might not be able to read the information that organisations put on their website. So how do we work with all of those organisations which have some great services? How do we work with them so that they realise, okay, there's a barrier for some tenants to access my service? How do I address that barrier? How do I redesign my service? How do I engage with the community so that people know my service exists and they use my service and it helps prevent homelessness for that tenant with disability? That's the second part of our project. That's the second deliverable. So in terms of an approach to doing what could be such a huge project, our approach as a peak body with lots of really good organisations already linked in with us is to collaborate. So the first step, and this is what I've been doing since I've started, which is a few weeks in between laryngitis and bronchitis, and is looking at some great stuff that already exists. So a whole bunch of people have reached out to Shelter and said, hey, love your project. Do you know this exists? So we've been mapping services in lots of jurisdictions, innovations, training for staff, different types of platforms for sharing information. So we're pulling that together so that we don't reinvent the wheel. In fact, so we encourage people by success that's already been achieved in other spaces. We're forming a co-design group. So I've already had some great applications from people with really diverse experience of disability and different experience of renting. So they're renting in different places and finding different challenges. And they're going to join us. This is a paid opportunity. They're going to join us and share those experiences with a view to what would help, what works, what would have made my experience different. We're also, with all of the organisations that have reached out to us, forming an advisory group. Now, the advisory group is a chance for quite diverse organisations who might not have interacted so much before to come together and hear what they are doing in the space. There's going to be some really good practice that we see, and there are going to be some real aha moments. And I have to say that the honesty and transparency exhibited by organisations so far has just been it's really been something to hang on to, because organisations feel proud of the work they do, but then suddenly when they realise themselves that their service is not available to certain people when it should be, you know, that's a really humbling moment. So services have said to me, we need to address this. We've not put a disability lens on how we advertise, how we promote, and how we make our services available. So, you know, just kudos to those organisations for saying, okay, now's the time to do something about it. So they are the organisations who have joined the advisory group. And we're going to have a first meeting of those organisations later this month when my voice is back. I'm really looking forward to that. So that's what the project is looking like so far. So although this project is predicated on the fact that people with disability are not having the best outcome from renting, there are, however, some good things. There have been some great things. And that's, I guess, the buzz of starting a project by looking at strengths and looking at, you know, what's already been done that's great in the space, because advocacy around this space has been going on for some time. So, you know, we're clearly not the first. So we get to benefit from some really good things that have been happening. And there are some people in this room who have told me about some of the good things that are happening. So some of the approaches have been made easier for us around technology. So there are lots of different platforms now, accessibility features that we can build into, the sharing of information, the promotion of services. And Shelter WA is looking at itself in this as well. We've got a lot to learn about how we share information. So one of our capacity building exercises is we're meeting with an accessibility standards person on Friday who's going to look at our organisation and how we share things. So, you know, it's time for us to, Royston, there'll be some challenges there, but we're looking forward to that. We've seen examples of tenancy advocates who have been trained in supported decision-making. Now, if you're in the disability space, one of the big human rights issues that comes up is, do I, as a person with disability, get to make my own decisions, or is there a substitute decision maker? So there are so many opportunities to give back to an individual their right to make their own decisions. And supported decision making is a skill that is now being developed in lots of organisations that gives a person with disability every opportunity to explain what they want, to understand what they need, and to tell services what they expect. So this is really quite extraordinary. And so much work is happening in this space in WA. So it was exciting to hear about that. We've got a really interesting example of frontline housing staff being trained by people with lived experience. So when you think of all of those pointy interactions in the rental experience with staff who might not have training, imagine when they are trained and understand from a lived experience perspective what it's like to have a stranger come into your home and make those judgments about you. At the legislative and policy level, one of the big debates, I guess, that's arisen around NDIS has been, how do you give people with disability more control and choice? And what was scary was when the accommodation provider is also the provider of all of the supports that come into the home. Where does that give a person choice and control? So there's been that acknowledgement now that there needs to be a separation between the provision of accommodation and the provision of housing supports and other supports. And so that's quite powerful, but it's not a done deal from what I can see. And when I look, for example, at the licensed psychiatric hostels, you can see that a number of those accommodation providers are now also becoming NDIS service providers. Thanks for the nods. Yeah, so it's not a done deal. Something still for us to be campaigning about. In other jurisdictions, there have been tenants unions. So tenants have worked out, okay, we're being evicted because there's stigma around our disability. You know, people see the way we use the space quite differently. They see us as a nuisance. So people have formed unions and they've undertaken projects with neighbours to break down stigma. So more acceptance that there's a diverse tenancy population. I'd like to talk about some of these in particular. Now, I don't know if you've seen this. Hands up anyone who's heard about the Blurred Borders resource. Thank you for giving me the chance to tell you about it, because it was only just launched. Now, this project, long time coming, but started in the north of WA, and it's to support people, Aboriginal people, who often work across the Northern Territory and WA borders. And they're faced with a bunch of legal stuff in a bunch of government departments, made even more complicated by the fact you've got a Northern Territory and WA, two jurisdictions. So legal aid and then consumer protection started working together to develop a dictionary that was matched to graphics, to cards, so that people are building an understanding of legal process based on a storytelling approach. So the practitioners, so the legal practitioners, are now being trained in how to use these picture cards so that when they're sitting down with the client, they have an agreed understanding. What does this picture mean? Okay, where do we want to go on this journey? Now, what's going to happen when we go to the magistrate's court? Who's your advocate? Who's the lawyer? Where do we want to be at the end of this? Who are the people who you want here? And so it takes time, but the goal is that the person involved is much more informed and able to make their own decisions. So this resource is called Blur Borders. It's available on the website. All of the graphics and images are available to use for free. I've seen one kit, and look, they cost a bit. They look really nice, and they cost a bit to produce. But if this resource gets used and empowers people, and knowing that it's now specifically about tenancy matters, then this is a pretty amazing and innovative approach. But they went through a co-design process. Now it's built on local knowledge. And what they also realise is you can have this beautiful kit, but if practitioners don't use it, if you don't do that organisational capacity building and train staff to use it, then it won't get used. But so much potential, and it's available. And it was just great to see it. Now in WA, an organisation called WA Individualised Services. So they get funding to capacity build the sector to work with people with disability, any sector, any service. And so what they've done is take the time to develop approaches to working with individuals that gives that individual the chance to build on their communication strengths. So it's not about the person having to fit into what the service wants. It's about the service adapting to the communication needs of the individual. Now, WASE also, all of its resources online, available to use. They got funded to do this work. They make this work available to other organisations. Back at consumer protection. So they've realised, again in the tenancy space, that citing the Residential Tenancies Act and using a whole bunch of legal jargon is not bringing people to their resource. So they're looking at different ways of advertising their service. They're using tenancy words in language, and the language is specific, in this case, to the Goldfields. They're also putting the face of a human being on their material and a mobile number. So you can just see this, okay, recognition. If we're really going to support people, knowing that in a tenancy situation, people are likely to be quite concerned, possibly distressed. What's the easiest way to reach out to people? Now this was from Canada. So I just loved this project. This organisation, this tenancy advocacy organisation, realised that that people were being evicted on the basis of complaints from neighbours. And so they said to the tenants, what can we do? You know, these people use their home differently, they use their yard differently, they brought around lots of family, and other tenants were complaining. So yeah, the tenants got together. They tried to understand their neighbours and they tried to build bridges with their neighbours, and in some cases really successfully. So address stigma. Now, I don't know what our co-design group is going to come up with. They might say, this is what we're going to do, and like, more power to them. But we've seen that this works in some jurisdictions. So this community housing provider, just automatically, all of their tenancy agreements are in accessible formats. So if the person who's the tenant has a measure of intellectual disability and either needs support to read a document or needs a document read to them, then the documents are available in all those formats. Now, some providers in Australia would be heading that way. We see more examples of easy English, but overseas, quite common to find easy read documents. WASE's website, now when you look at it, there's a button on a number of the pages and it goes from easy English to press the button, easy read. So if easy English is useful for most of us, you know, it's around reading age of say, you know, age 10 to 11, well, easy read is a document that might be for somebody who probably can't read, but can have things explained to them and read out to them. So that would be the difference, say, between easy English and easy read. But yeah, so WASE's website, when you see that button, easy read, suddenly everything that you've been reading in easy English will be converted to easy read. If you're a support worker supporting someone with disability, you're now sitting beside them and using this website to explain their rights, their responsibilities, and to get their feedback. Now, this is a West Australian webpage from Legal Aid, stolen from Victoria, of course, but, you know, good steal, I reckon, because this is a video, really simple language about your rights as a tenant. I can watch that video, I can pause that video, I can replay that video, I can go to the link and follow up some more stuff about it. There's so much information at this page without it being too busy or too overwhelming. I can also have a web chat with somebody. So if I sit at that page long enough, a little pop-up says, "Can I help you?" It's not that hard. Now, Colin, who's in the audience, is working on a really delicious project which involves people with lived experience of psychosocial disability supporting other people with experience of psychosocial disability to get a rental, to maintain their rental, to deal with issues in their rental. This project is absolutely delicious and I'm looking forward to finding out more about it. But one of the things that really stood out to me was the organisational capacity building that's being done between the service provider and the private rental market. So staff from Wellways in this project are actually supporting private sector rental staff with this project. Just think of the potential there if property managers had that additional support and training to maybe head off issues before they become an eviction. So we're looking forward to finding out more about this project. So thank you, Colin. Another West Australian project, this in the community housing space. This is called the Supportive Landlord Project, which Shelter WA is involved with. Now, this takes a little bit further the traditional role of a housing officer. This says we know that there is an overrepresentation of people with disability in community housing. How do we be supportive? How do we actually cater to the needs of our tenants? So this is developing training for housing officers, and I guess it's a project that's live right now in the community housing provider space, because clearly it comes with costs and it comes with, an investment, an expectation. Who should bear this additional cost in this space for supporting people with additional needs as tenants? So we're really glad to have a community housing provider involved in our advisory group to hear how this is going to play out. But obviously the capacity building of staff who are who are most often interacting with a tenant with disability is a really important opportunity. Has anyone else heard of this project? In terms of individual capacity building, you might have heard that this training for people with disability is currently available at some nods and is underway. So people can participate in this training as a person with disability to build your own self-advocacy skills. There could be an opportunity here for us to be looking at how do we turn this into a tenancy or housing specific set of skills when you think about the amount of negotiation we all have to do when we're maintaining a tenancy or trying to get a tenancy. So this is happening in Perth now, this training. So hopefully that was inspiring. It inspired me when I got to see that this stuff is actually happening. And I know that there is more. Like I'm relatively new to this space, and in a month, you know, this has already become apparent, but I know I'm going to find out more through this project, and I'm really looking forward to finding out more. So what are we doing with this project now? So from now until June, we're building that lived experience co-design team. So around 10 to 12 people who'll be talking about the challenges they've faced and what it is that they want to feel stronger as a tenant. The advisory group going to meet for the first time later this month. It's a big group, and I'm meeting with them one-on-one to find out their strengths and what they want from this project, what they'd like to bring to this project. Because let's face it, there'll be some people in this space with quite different needs. So we've got REWA, who's representing, you know, private sector. We've got community housing. We have Department of Communities involved. And we have a whole bunch of service providers with some great examples to share of good practice or potential practice, or to raise issues and look for solutions. So now until June, we do this work with our co-design group and the advisory group. And what we hope to have in July is the workshops designed and any particular resources that we need to develop. We will be prototyping those over those months and have them ready for launch in July. Then July, because this is a statewide project, we start delivering the workshops across the state. So that's our goal, to try and get all of that done by November. So what I've put out is a request for lived experience participants. I would love you to share that request with people you know. I'm after an evaluator for our project, because we want to do this the best way we can, and also build on the good work that's already been done in this space. We also want a co-design facilitator, and expressions of interest for all those roles have been shared. So we've created a project page at Shelter WA's website for this project. I'd love you to visit, I'd love you to interact. And thank you for putting up with my raspy voice. So thank you.
Thanks, Donna.